So we had a summit on auto thefts, but everyone drove off without any real concrete new announcements. Now, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc preempted that summit yesterday, announcing $28 million for Canada Border Services Agency. However, today, the only additional information was the suggestion of tougher penalties for thieves and a crackdown on technology used to steal vehicles. Meanwhile, the opposition, particularly Pierre Poilievre, spent the past 3 days pitching how they would respond to the issue. Here's a breakdown of the political stakes and the strategy behind today's summit for our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark, she's senior advisor with Bennett Jones, CTV News analyst and former Toronto Mayor John Tory, and CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Thank you all for being here. Christy, I'll start with you on this one. This government is a government of consultation, so it's really no shock that they held the summit, but how badly did they need a deliverable out of this?
Well, they're getting killed by the Conservatives on it, there's no doubt. I mean, remember, Doug Ford started talking about this in November last year and devoted provincial money for it. It's not like this was a big surprise. And, you know, Pierre Poilievre did what he should have done, which is got this issue cranked up at the federal level. So the federal government has, the Trudeau government has been waiting way too long to do something about it. They, I think, politically made a mistake in letting it wait so long that Mr. Poilievre got on top of it first. I don't think there's a big win for them in it. I think they're really just playing catch up at this point because they really did lose the momentum. I mean, I think we're all glad they're finally doing something, but it does suggest that they're a little bit slow on the uptake.
Yeah, and John, in Toronto, I mean, thefts went up by 25.4% over 2022. And Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown says that it's a bigger issue than housing in his city. So how critical is it for the government to actually get a handle on this and soon?
Well, it's kind of a table stakes issue. It really speaks to the question of the competence of the government, as does the whole issue of timing. I mean, the fact is the summit was a good idea, getting all the governments together and the police services and everybody else involved, the border people, but it should have happened 6 months ago. I mean, it's like a number of things. And I do see signs that they're getting their act together and having announcements now on housing benefits and on refugee funding at last and on caps on some of the foreign students, which I think was a necessity given everything. But they're just taking so long to do these things. And, you start to run out of time. It's not because it's not a long way from the election. I've said many times on this program, they're behind in the polls, but with quite a long time to go before the election. But you can fall so deeply into the hole you can't climb out. So I think that the car theft summit was a good idea, just executed about 6 months later, and it allowed Mr. Poilievre to, get an advantage he might not have had if they'd acted sooner. Now the challenge for them might be to steal some of his policies if they think they're any good, because there's nothing wrong with that in politics.
Yeah, Tom, to John's point, though, can you understand how they seem to be one step behind so chronically here? Housing, immigration, and now car thefts?
Well, let's take the question of housing and immigration as they go together. We learned just a few weeks ago that they were given a full briefing by their top administrators, really top-notch civil servants, saying, whoa, stop the music. We're going to hit a wall here. We're letting in far too many people for the housing resource that we have, and we're going to have a huge problem. They totally ignored it. I think that goes to John's point. This is about the basic competence, the ability to run the government. It's also not a great thing for a political party that is in power to be having all the tunes called by an opposition leader, because they're reacting to what Poilievre is putting on the table. Poilievre talks about housing, he talks about immigration, Trudeau and his government react. Here, they're reacting. But I will go to the nub of it, which is car theft. And I have to say that today I was listening a large number of chiefs of police, heads of big police forces, provincial police here in Quebec, for example, coming forward and saying, this is good news. This is good that we're finally taking an all-of-government approach to this, everybody at the same table. So there is a lot of good coming out of this, especially if the numbers start to drop in the coming months, which I suspect they will.
Yeah, and Christy, the government sort of preempted their summit with that announcement for CBSA in the Port of Montreal. One of those scanners costs about $3 million. Do you think that they needed to make that announcement going into this so they felt like they had a deliverable coming out of it?
Yes, I do. I think that's exactly what happened. And it's kind of, in behind the scenes, what happens when these sorts of decisions come out is they're scrambling around to try and figure out who's got some money, who maybe already had made a decision but it hadn't been announced, and then they throw it out there. I think too, and both John and Tom sort of touched on this, the problem that they have isn't just that they're getting, the Conservatives are getting the jump on them on announcements. It is amongst Canadians, there is a real sense of public disorder descending on big cities in particular. And it feels to a lot of people like governments just aren't enforcing the law in their community anymore. And so crime is getting worse. And the Trudeau government has a real problem in that regard. It's getting worse. And I think that today was, in addition to many other motivations, an attempt to try and seem like they're really working to make community safer. Community safer, whether or not it's too late, hard to say. But I think Canadians are really feeling the pinch of crime.
Yeah, John, I had Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc here, and he said they want to get this under control as quickly as possible. Time is not their friend. How quickly do they actually need to show some progress on this to make sure that they are showing, to Christy's point, the people in the cities that things are safer, that things are getting taken care of?
The answer is quickly. And when they've had to do it, I think sometimes because Mr. Singh had the whip on them, and other times because they just decided to do things quickly and put legislation through in the drop of a hat, they've done it. And I think if there's changes to the law, other things they need to do to deploy technology or whatever it is they do as part of a strategy, they've got to move on it fairly quickly. And then the other thing where they've had some bad luck, it's not bad luck that anybody made up against them. They had something come out on the very day they had this summit saying that half the people that are patrolling and investigating at the borders and looking for this kind of criminal activity have not received their training, a report from the auditor. And that's a competence buster too, because people are saying, oh, I see, you're going to put a big emphasis on cars and they should be on guns and drugs coming across the border. You've got all these people there that we're paying for and they're not trained because nobody gave them their training program. And these are the things that cause the public just to shake their head and say, oh, maybe these guys are just out of gas. And so they've got to execute, and they've got to execute quickly, as they have in some other areas when they really cared, because then people will see something actually happening.
Tom, is it weeks or months that they have, or even less than that, to come out of this and to say, okay, this is the game plan going forward?
My sense is that Trudeau's giving himself the spring session. He's giving himself until June to see if his numbers can start to change with regard to Pierre Poilievre. He's a proud person. He's not listening, for example, to those who've told him to be very careful about the Donald Trump references. Came out right yesterday and said, you know what, Poilievre's theme is make Canada great again. So he's being himself. He's headstrong, and he's going at this with everything that he's got. But unfortunately, it's just shining a light on corners of the public administration since he's been prime minister that are completely failing. And that's the difficulty. You can't have a one-day conference to get away from something that's been occurring for 2 years and you've done nothing about. You can't hold a conference on housing and immigration and expect people to believe that you're going to do something now when they know you were told you had to do something 2 years ago. So he's going to try to take stock of the situation. He doesn't have much runway left. My thought is that come June, if things haven't changed for him, he's going to have no choice but to step down and ask the Liberal Party to call a leadership convention.